film is so unique. It's such a unique concept, and if we do it right, we have a little sliver of film history that is just for us, because it's a film completely without dialogue.
I was so amazing, they would like to, to make this kind of movie. Because for some other filmmaker, it could be a very risky, project.
John is not just an iconic film director. I mean, he is the master of the camera. And I've never worked with a film director before that can tell so much of the story just in the way that he moves the camera.
I have so much confidence about this. I know so much about movies, I know how to using, a certain kind of technique to tell a story. And I also is very good at visual. I'm using camera movement to do something meaningful.
In this case, there were few things that differentiated from a classic John Woo movie. Number one was the budget, and number two was the fact that it was a movie with no dialogue. And I thought John had a very smart approach towards both things.
I think a lot of people imagine that doing a film without dialogue would in some ways be easier, because at least like work-wise, you don't have to learn any lines. And I have to admit, it's kind of nice to not have to learn any lines, but it actually is a lot more demanding, and it forces you to prepare so much more in a lot of the other aspects. Everything else becomes so much more important. The camera movement, the intensity of your inner life, like what's expressed in your eyes, your body language, everything else becomes so much more important because you remove that one element.
For Silent Night, the visual is very important. It means the cinema photographer also is very important as well. Because, I'm so much rely on camera and lighting to tell a story.
He was looking all the time for analogies of what will do what. And so that was on the creative front, dealing with the lack of dialogue on the production front. What he wanted to do and what he described from day one, and he followed pretty tight with that concept. He wanted to make a movie that, because of the budget constraint, the very short time of shooting, will be pre-designed shot by shot for the best possible way. The way French cinema, from the 60s and the 70s and so on, was conducted, where the mise-en-scene and the long shots are telling the story. But even if it's not extremely long takes, they're still pre-designed, so there is, in a sense, no coverage of over the shoulder and over the shoulder. There is just a story that you tell shot by shot by shot, and the shot by shot by shot are pre-thought in John's head and pre-designed not just for the action sequences, but for the entire movie.
He has weird, crazy ideas and fun, and I don't think that's gonna work, and then you do it and it works. So it's just a fun director. He's a fun director.
That was a fascinating experience to see him doing it and sort of using what I like to call turning the defect into an effect, and using the lack of time and resources and turning it into cinematic gold.
But there's one thing I remind him every day. There's one thing very important is I need to see their eyes, because their eyes of the actor, their real emotion, their real feeling is that you can see, all you can see and feel all through their eyes. So I need a little special lighting for the eyes. No matter what to do, what scene, it's a night or day, I got to see their eyes, and I got to see the color of the eyeball,
Your body language, your inner life, what's being expressed through your eyes, all that becomes much more important. So it's actually more difficult, and it's more challenging.
There's so much you can say and do without dialogue, So it's a really powerful thing, but it also can fall into the wrong hands and be done terribly wrong. The
way John tends to shoot, he's he really is an artist, and he's very, very creative. And he reacts to what people are doing. He reacts to the set itself. He reacts to something the actor may do, and he'll adjust and change on the spot.
Sometimes I do shit that he wasn't expecting and he likes it, you know? So it's just really an unreal experience to just be here working with that man.
We would go to a location, and I could see what, you know, I understood what they mean when they say a visionaire, because he would start to describe the shots, shot by shot, in order, being very specific and actually very consistent with his ideas from early pre-production to... But when he would describe a shot, you know, the room get quiet and everybody tunes in, it's because there is an intensity to his vision that was just really addictive to anyone involved. It was really different than any experience I ever had.
So in a way, this script, being dialogue-free, was a great fit for the way he thinks, because since you're not trying to fit in all the dialogue on the page, you can literally change the action a little bit, and he can change his shooting plan for the day if he needs to, or adjust it, which I think probably drove some people crazy sometime, but ultimately was really, it's his style, and it makes for great filmmaking.
I didn't want the movie cut it in like a typical Hollywood style. You know, cutting very fast, very choppy, and every shot is very short, and it seemed to be, you know, they didn't care about character or story, you know, they just make everything fast. But that's not Zach's style. He liked to tell a story, and tell the story nicely, and leave the space, and leave some room for the audience to think. Let them to think about and let them to feel about the character.
As many people probably know, movies are not shot chronologically. They're shot out of sequence for a lot of logistical reasons. Like they'll shoot out of location. So everything at a certain location you want to shoot at the same time. When I'm editing the movie, typically, I'm editing out of sequence as well. This movie, I think, is probably the first movie I've ever edited where I edited it in sequence. I started at the first scene, and I went right through to the last scene, which was really great. I can't tell you how good that was. I wish I could do it all the time.
The director is that connecting tissue between point A and point C. And I saw a cut early on. They invited me into the editing room to see a cut. I had very few notes. You know, a thing that I remember that exists somewhere that they maybe didn't pay attention to, or a moment that I thought was either too short or too long, but really minimal. When you don't have a great director, you end up shooting one thing and the editor is ending up editing at different things. But it doesn't happen if there is a good director.
One of the things I loved about this movie, working with John, is we rapidly understood that we had a shorthand. We didn't have to say everything. I think I really understand the way he thinks, so things came kind of naturally in that respect. But the fact that it exists as a transition is John. I saw the shot, it was clear to me that's how it was meant to be used.
John is someone who is a master at execution. While we're filming it, I just know, like, you know, when you get that feeling when you're filming something, it's just like, I just know I'm doing something epic.
He was constantly looking for ways to tell the story with the visuals, and to sort of have the visuals and later on the sound, but have the visuals telling a story, telling a state of mind, describing a state of mind.
I worked with George Miller once on a movie, and he said something to me that always stuck with me. And he said, when the craft is there, the art can follow.
He also controlled the rhythm of the scene, the rhythm of the shot, and very precise. And very precise, good for the music and sound.
With John, it's funny. I mean, he's a very good storyteller, and he's always said that the good guy has a little bit of evil, and the bad guy has a little bit of good, and that is something he always brings apart in his story. But when it came to the visceral aspect of that storytelling, for the most part, he never, or at least I don't remember him ever being really specific about what he wanted to hear where. He just wants people to do what he feels they do best, and then he can take that clearinghouse approach and craft it to what he wants it to be.
When I'm editing, I have this sound in my head. Not nearly the sound that Mark is going to bring. He'll take my ideas and make them 3 times better.
Well, as we know, hardly anything besides dialogue that's recorded on set ever gets used in a movie because it just can't. The logistics of it really can't. And in this particular film, even though there wasn't dialogue, I was expecting a fairly decent production track because you want to ground things in reality. There might not be any dialogue, but there's just a lot of physicality that you really want to capture. There's some scenes that really, we were fortunate to have some pretty good production recording. In the garage fight, that was awesome. There'd be no way to make that feel as good as it did, as real as it did, as visceral as it did, unless you had that physicality happening.
There definitely was a challenge of being the voice a little bit, but it had to supply the emotional background for the arc of the film, really, and that was the main thing. The actors were amazing. I don't know, honestly, maybe it's harder even to act when you're not able to speak. You have to communicate everything through just physicality. But I was really guided by that and by the way that John shot it and the way it was edited.
Not having any dialogue and not having to work the sound effects or the music around it is an incredible opportunity because you can mold those 2 sound groups against each other as appropriate without having a 3rd group to deal with.
If somebody's saying a line, something, I might comment on the line or do something that supports whatever they're saying or the emotionality, but maybe I wouldn't do it right when they're saying it. Maybe it's a question of let them say it, and then it's like, then the music can say something. When you don't have the dialogue there, the music can be almost a little bit earlier.
The score is such a critical piece in any movie. I mean, we created the temp in the editing room. On some movies, you have a music editor working with you. We did not have a music editor because we didn't have enough budget, frankly. Not only is it in the temp you're trying to create, the pieces you choose are obviously very important, but what's also really important is the what's called the spotting. Music spotting is the post-production term for it, but it's where you start and stop the music.
Oftentimes, music is used as a crutch when a filmmaker is uncertain about the material and you want to guide, but if music doesn't have a point of view, it shouldn't be in the picture. So I like that John's a strong director and he has faith in what he's doing, and there's scenes that are quiet, and it's okay. It's okay to be quiet. Like, you don't need to be hit over the head.
You know, believe it or not, we did do ADR in this film, but not for words, for breaths and efforts and things that really supported the physicality of it. So we could actually be very subtle with that and hear the little details. And when you can hear the little details at a low level without competing against other sounds, you understand the silence. And the silence plays into our character as well, because just because he doesn't speak doesn't mean he can't hear. So there's a lot of audio cues, not necessarily that he hears and reacts to, but just really creates his world.
When he's seeing his kid, the flashbacks of the family and all that, having a theme for that, which comes from the whole root of this is that little music box which plays. So it all connects back to that. And being able to take these elements and weave it into the story. So the music itself almost has a narrative that goes hand in hand with the narrative, with the film, and can a little bit guide the viewer, you know, just by listening.
It's really more something where the images lead and the sound gets to follow. It's like a dance, and it's really nice to have somebody show you that dance as it goes.
When I worked with Wachowskis, they both started out as carpenters, and we used to talk about that all the time, making the building analogy. You know, when you build a house, you start out, you come up with a design. You work with an architect, and you come up with a blueprint and a framework. And then everything you do from that point on, I mean, the materials you pick, and the kind of windows you choose, and the countertops, and you're building on top of the original design. And I think making a movie is much the same.